Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
This is the show where you get to try to stump us with your toughest maintenance questions, and you frequently succeed at that. And we love it. So if you have a question, please email us at podcasts@aopa.org for a chance to get on the show.
And make sure to follow and subscribe, and so you never miss a stump.
And if you'd like to get on our email list for our monthly newsletter and other stuff, the easiest way is to text the word SAVVY, S-A-V-V-Y, to 33777, and your smartphone will ask you for your name and email address and put you on our list. So text SAVVY, S-A-V-V-Y, to 33777 to put yourself on our list.
So I've been having some interesting, I don't want to call it debates, discussions. Isn't that what mom and dad would say when they were having an argument? You say, we're just having anyway.
Adversarial proceedings?
Adversarial proceedings.
Anyway, moving right along.
So there's an airplane that we installed an engine on after a prop strike and did an annual inspection, and it's gone away, and now it's in a pre-buy. The owners decided to sell, which we think is really sad. Anyway, that's beside the point. So now we're getting a call from the current owner's broker asking for help because the airplane's in pre-buy, and the shop has made a list of some things that are just really expensive. And so I got this list, and it included things like certain inspections were not done as part of the prop strike, like some sort of special inspection wasn't done on an alternator. And, and by the way, during the annual, the required 5-year oxygen regulator wasn't overhauled. We installed the bottle for the DOT, but we didn't overhaul the regulator. And so I'm challenging some of these things. And what I get back are scans of the appropriate pages in service manuals or from the STC for the oxygen system installation with highlighted.
ICA, right?
Yeah, ICA, or like in the Continental's manual, M-0 for a prop strike inspection. And certain things would be highlighted and say, well, this wasn't documented as being done. And so my response was, well, the truth is nothing is required to be done. There's no FAA requirement to do anything after a prop strike. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't. There's just not, there's no AD, there's no ICA.
There's no requirement if it's a Continental.
For a Continental, yes.
Important.
For a Lycoming, there is one, but actually is the purpose of that AD, it isn't really about prop strike. It's about getting rid of certain crankshaft gears that they were wanting to get rid of way back when, but that's beside the point. So on this Continental, there's no requirement to do anything. And another thing he commented was that we didn't explain why the engine was removed in the log entry. And it's like, well, no, I don't ever say why I do something. You don't say why you change the tire. Although some mechanics do, the tire was flat spotted, therefore I changed it.
Yeah.
Like, why does it matter?
Well, the why is what we call a discrepancy.
Exactly, yeah.
And we don't put discrepancies in logbook entries. No. The regulation requires that we put a description of the work performed. The logbook entry is memorializing the work that we performed.
Yeah, it's not material why we did it. Well, it may be to the buyer because he wants to know, well, it had a prop strike, but then it's like, well, what difference does it make? The work was done that took care of it. But the one that's gotten quite a bit of traction was the one for the oxygen bottle regulator. So I get a copy from the ICA and section, is it 5-6, whatever it is, from the ICA, and he has highlighted that airworthiness limitation. That's the title of that paragraph. And then there's some wording that says airworthiness limitations are FAA required items. And then down at the bottom, it made some other sort of note about oxygen systems are important, for flying the airplane.
For breathing. Yep.
For breathing, yes. But just below where it says airworthiness limitation, it said none.
None. The word
And then
none.
the word none and the hyphen, and then the explanation that, it's not actually required. But he highlighted everything except
None.
where it said none. and I'm like, wait.
He must have read over that
Yeah,
none
yeah,
part.
I mean, there's
Just went right
a
past it.
misunderstanding, I think, broadly about instructions for continued airworthiness. The title "Instructions for Continued Airworthiness" sounds
important.
like
Oh, yeah.
something you have to do,
Yeah.
but it isn't.
Mm.
The rules for ICAs are the same as the rules for maintenance manuals. That
Yeah.
Mhm.
if
It's
there's an
basically a
Or
maintenance
service
manual.
bulletins or service
if there's an
instructions.
airworthiness limitation section, then you have to do anything in the
It
airworthiness
say
limitation section.
suggestions for continued
Yeah,
airworthiness.
that would
That would be more accurate.
that would be much better
Yeah.
suggestions.
Yeah.
I like that.
So anyway, this is still kind of ongoing because the things that I'm challenging, or that I've informed the broker that he should challenge, are very expensive items that they're saying that the seller should pay for.
And they're holding up the sale, right?
They're holding up the
remember
sale.
that precise flight ICA the wording in it is very, very strange. And there's it says airworthiness limitations, and it says there are none.
Yep.
And then it says, to preserve the altitude
Right.
capability of the airplane, you need to overhaul the regulator every 5 years.
That sounds ominous.
Not an airworthiness limitation.
And it appears like it's within the airworthiness limitation section, but it's like a whole separate little statement.
They're sneaky. They're being sneaky.
They are. They really want you to do it.
We actually dealt with some service shops on this that got all wrapped around the axle about this 5-year thing, and we basically told them, well, then just placard the oxygen system in op,
right?
So we can get this airplane out of the
We'll fly low.
Yeah.
We'll fly
with
it
an
down.
annual sign off, because the oxygen system is allowed to be inoperative. And then we tell the owner, oh, just peel the inop sticker off and go breathe oxygen. It
just sounds wrong, but okay.
Yeah, it sounds wrong, but
But I mean, some shops are they just don't understand, and instead of trying to you try to educate them, and if they don't want to be educable, then you have to find a workaround.
And it's interesting because there's basically two places that say you have to comply with airworthiness limitations. And there's Part 91, Part 43, so it's in two places. But the way it's written, if you're careful, it's very understandable. It never says that you have to comply with all ICAs. It's very explicit. It says you have to comply with the airworthiness limitation section if there's anything in it.
Right.
And I don't know how many discussions I've had with mechanics who say, well, it's an ICA, I have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
No, that isn't what it says.
A lot of shops take that position.
Yeah.
And it's just wrong.
Speaking
Speaking of oxygen, that you just reminded me of something. I got actually a ticket from a client of ours by the name of Scott Ashen, who's a Mooney owner, but he also happens to own Aerox Oxygen Systems, a company in Florida. And he was relating to me that one of his customers, who also happened to be a Mooney owner, was filling his built-in oxygen system in his turbocharged Mooney, when an A&P mechanic happened to come by and saw him doing this and said, you're not allowed to fill the oxygen system. Only an A&P is allowed to fill the oxygen system. And Scott said, well, that was news to me, and I'm in the oxygen business. He said, what's your take on this? Is filling an oxygen system something that the owner is allowed to do? And I thought about it, and I have a turbocharged airplane with a built-in oxygen system, and I've had it recharged, at various airports around the country where I needed an oxygen fill because it's a consumable like fuel.
Mhm.
Oh,
And
those poor line guys.
my experience is that at high altitude airports, like Denver stuff, where oxygen fills are very, very common, it's usually something that the line crew does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At low altitude airports, it's usually something you have to take to a maintenance shop because those are the guys that keep the oxygen cart and
Mhm.
everything.
Or a welding company.
And so typically it's an A&P who does the fill,
Mm.
but they never give you a logbook entry for it. So it's
Mm.
pretty apparent that they don't consider it to be maintenance.
Mhm.
And to me, the most logical, I mean, there's nothing in writing about any of this, but
They don't teach it in school.
to me, the logical way of thinking about filling an oxygen system is like filling a fuel tank or adding oil. It's
Adding
a
oil.
servicing
It's a
thing.
servicing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Putting air in the
Um,
tires.
Now you could also, I suppose, you could say, well, no, it's not servicing, but it's preventive maintenance, which is something an owner could do, but he'd have to
Yep.
make a logbook entry.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, it's preventive maintenance under the Colleen interpretation, because if Colleen says that it's okay to put 1800 psi nitrogen in a shock strut, which it does,
Yeah.
then it ought to be okay to put 1800
1800
psi
oxygen
in a
in a
bottle.
tank. Yeah.
But I personally think the best way to think about it is as a servicing thing. It's a
Mm.
non-maintenance operation. It doesn't require a logbook entry, and it's in the same way that we don't make a logbook entry when we fuel an airplane. It's
Or
it's
put
not
oil in the
considered
engine.
it's not considered to be maintenance.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's nothing that defines any of that any place. I don't know of anything that says fueling is not maintenance, it's servicing. I don't
Sure.
even know that the word servicing appears in
It's not
anywhere
in
in Part 91 or
one.
Part 33.
I
The
could see
definitions.
where fueling the airplane could be preventive maintenance.
But then you'd have
Preventing.
but then you'd have to make a logbook entry every time you fueled it.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, I told Scott I thought the best way to think of filling an oxygen system is that it was a servicing operation. It
Mhm.
could be done by anybody with a pulse, and it
Yep.
didn't require a logbook entry.
I would agree with that.
I would agree. It's interesting the kind of questions that come up every now and what people think.
Mhm.
So did the mechanic? I mean, that's a horrible safety violation. Surely he called somebody and turned it in.
Yeah, that's the kind of
Well, I
neighbor you
suspect
need.
if he did, he got really embarrassed.
Yeah, hopefully.
That some mechanics just somehow think that they have been deputized as
They're the
safety
police. Yes. Safety
and
police.
I always say, look, if you want to be a member of the safety police, go
Join
to
the
work for
FAA.
the FAA. Those are the safety police. Your
That'll scare 'em
A&Ps
off.
are not supposed to be the safety police.
Go to the dark side.
The dark side.
A&Ps are just
Sorry,
supposed to
FAA. I didn't mean
supposed
that.
to do their work properly. That's what they're supposed to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Our first question is from Mike, who is frustrated with a feature on his engine monitor. I can't wait to hear this one. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so about a year and a half ago, I put a lot of avionics into a Cessna 150, and
That's cool.
It's a 1971
Wow.
Aerobat with the O200 in
Oh,
it.
awesome.
So when that came out, it had like an EGT that covered all 4 cylinders and
Yes.
oil temperature that was either green or not. And so it's evolved. My questions kind of evolved with all the new gauges out there that are on this. The key one that has frustrated me is the oil temperature sensor. And so I did some digging and some researching, and anyways, it would start flashing at me cautionary yellow if it was at 200, and then it would give me a warning at like 210 for the oil temperature. I initially the upgrade finally came back to me in November, and so I never worried about it until about March, when air temperatures were reaching 70 degrees, 60 degrees, and all of a sudden the oil temperature was getting what I can tell is normal temperatures from listening to you guys a lot. So anyways, I started doing some research, and The Continental Manual for the O200 says that normal operating temperature for the oil is 150 to 170 with a maximum of 225. And the POH says it's 240. And that 150 to 170 from the Continental Manual seems really low listening to you guys, because I'm, not trying to put words in your mouth, but you want to get it up to at least 180 degrees to boil off some water. I feel like I hear that a lot from you guys. So I guess I have CHT monitors on it now, and EGT and everything else. So how important is that oil temperature, and what should a realistic maximum be before it starts flashing at me, telling me go land right now?
Well, my first thought is this: the engine monitor you've installed, is it installed as primary, meaning your old gauges have been removed?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a GI 275.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so the only readings that should be on that gauge are what were on the original gauge in the airplane. So it has a green arc and it has a red line.
Right.
If I remember right, and I'm not a 152 aficionado, but I don't think the original gauge had any yellow markings.
No.
So they should not be in your engine monitor.
It's supposed to be helpful, but it's not required.
Well,
Yeah.
and the original gauge probably had a red line, but it probably didn't have a number on it, so you didn't know what the hell
Right.
the temperature it was when it got to red line.
So
The really two questions here. The one question, and Paula, maybe you can weigh in on this. This is oil temperature for an O200. And normally when we talk about oil temperature recommendations and say we like to see it between 180 and 200, we're talking about, an engine that has an oil cooler and a vernitherm and stuff. And the O200 doesn't have that, right? It's a tank. It doesn't have an oil cooler.
yeah,
I don't think it probably has a vernitherm, does it? Well, maybe it does.
yeah. Boy, I'm not
What
an
would
O200 guy.
What would a vernitherm do? It wouldn't send the oil anywhere, right?
Because there's no oil
What would
cooler,
it send
right?
it to?
There's no
Yeah.
cooler.
Yeah, I don't know, but anyway, it may be that the numbers for an O200 are different than the ones that we usually talk about, because the O200 is a dry sump engine and it doesn't have an oil cooler. So you'd have to, and I mean, officially, the POH normally trumps the engine stuff. I don't know. I mean, whether that's a good thing, but that's the way, I think that's the way it works.
Does yours actually have a POH?
Yes. Yeah.
It's not an owner's manual. It's an actual POH.
No, it's not an AFM.
It's not it's not an airplane flying manual or
Flight
whatever,
manual.
but it's I believe it's a pilot's operating handbook.
Yeah.
That's it. Yep.
I mean,
Okay. All right.
yeah.
Because 74, Cessna made a transition in the mid 70s, and most of them didn't happen until 76.
Okay.
What?
And
Really?
I messed up. Mine's a 71. So even
I have a
maybe less
POH on
likely.
my 71. What are
Yeah,
you
no,
talking about?
all airplanes, pretty much all airplanes have POHs. It's that they went to airplane flight manuals in order to see. Originally, all limitations had to be placards, and gradually over time, we got more and more and more placards, and to the point where there wasn't any more real estate to put placards on. And at that point, the FAA invented this thing called airplane flight manual and said, "Oh well, we can put limitations in the airplane flight manual." And the airplane flight manual is a part of the POH for airplanes that were built, after the mid 70s, like Paul said.
Well, in Mike's airplane.
And the AFM is the only part of the POH that's FAA approved.
So what Mike has with his airplane is it's a owner operating manual. It's not called a POH. It's not in a binder. A lot of the old Cessnas didn't have. It wasn't labeled as a POH. It was called an owner's. Gosh, was owner's?
It's typically a real
operator
thin,
handbook or
thin
something.
thing, and it
real thin. It wasn't
stapled
serial number
together.
specific. It didn't. Yeah. So anyway, that's I was asking, but
But the other thing
Yeah.
is
You're right, Paul.
is the nuisance alerts on the GI 275, and the installer is supposed to set those up. But I'll give you a little secret: if you press the inner knob in
Mhm.
and then power the instrument up, it will magically go into installer setup mode, and then you can go in there and you can change all that stuff. Now you're not supposed to. It's supposed to be the avionics shop that does that, but I won't tell.
Yeah. So I took it to I moved from Norfolk to Omaha, Nebraska area, and I took it to a shop that I trust, and not at Epley Field that just got the unfortunate tornadoes that came through. But anyway, so I took it to the shop there, and they test the thermostat because maybe the thermostat would have been wrong, and then they went in and they adjusted all the way up to red line, no cautionary, all the way up to red line at 240, because that's what the owner's manual says.
yeah, that's exactly how it's supposed to be done.
Yeah. Okay. And I just didn't know. I was trying to figure out, like, okay, is that the right answer, or is that the answer that makes me stop annoying them, or
No,
that
it's
kind
true
of
to the
thing?
original gauge. It's what the original gauge used to show,
Yeah,
which is
that's the requirement. is
certified.
to-
Yep.
Okay.
When you put in the digital, it has to mimic the original.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And
Big
it just shows the numbers so that I can see how close I'm getting. It doesn't throw yellow cautionary anymore, which is I'm happy with. Right. Okay. All right.
And,
So
sometimes there's conflicting information. That if you look, for example, at the engine type certificate data sheet, it'll say one thing, and then if you look in the airplane maintenance manual or something, it'll say another thing. And the general rule is that the aircraft manufacturer's guidance trumps the engine manufacturer's guidance.
Yeah,
That
there may
seems
be changes in the
counterintuitive.
installation of the engine that change the parameters that the engine manufacturer had it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And one of the things I was wondering is, like, probe placement, if you're testing it right when it's coming out of the engine versus when it's in the oil sump or that kind of thing. But
Well, I'm again on
not on
on wet sump engines that have oil coolers. Normally, the probe is pretty close to where the oil cooler discharges engine into
the
oil
engine,
into the oil galleries, so it's at the coolest part of the cycle.
Okay.
I don't know where the probe is on an O200, but it doesn't have an oil cooler, so it's got to be a different place.
Either way,
the probe
sounds
also
like 240. Go ahead, Paul.
the probe also has to be in the same location as the original probe. So you can't, and you can't do it on your engine, but say on a Lycoming, there's a couple of places that you can put the temperature probe. But if you're installing the engine monitor as the primary system, the oil temperature probe, or all the probes for that matter, if they're duplicating the original instruments, the probes have to be in the original locations.
Interesting.
And that makes sense too. I don't know how many people have done this kind of upgrade on a Cessna 150.
Not many.
And I know it was this shop's first time ever even thinking about it. And so I'm trying to get it to a TAA to meet the TAA specifications. So I'm just waiting on an autopilot.
In other words, it's going to be the world's most improved Cessna 150.
What is TAA? That's new.
I'm not familiar with that.
Technically
advanced aircraft.
Wow.
Okay, understood.
So instead of renting a complex, you can then do your instrument. You can get used to instrument boxes safely at 80 knots, right? Like a Cessna 150,
lower cost.
It's great.
That's brilliant.
And way lower cost. And so then if you want to get into a 120 knot airplane, the boxes aren't new to you and that kind of thing. Because I feel like a lot of people upgrade and they're going faster and they got new avionics and it's costing more. So they want to get off the ground faster and everything else. So
and safety is compromised.
So if you're upgrading to TAA, is there some sort of official documentation that you have to do to declare that it's that, or you get it to
No,
that
you just have to meet.
and
You just have to meet
You
the
just have to meet
requirements.
the requirements. Okay.
Yep. And so the long pole in the tent right now is a 2-axis autopilot.
That's great.
I don't know. I would have to check to see if Cessna ever approved their autopilots that Navomatic.
Yeah.
They had a great marketing company,
Hey, it's the
Navomatic.
60s.
They also had
OmniVision windows.
OmniVision windows, and back in the 50s, they had Landomatic landing.
Landomatic.
Do you remember that some Cessna 150s, I forget what years, actually had a rear view mirror installed?
Oh yeah, when they first came out with I used to fly one. It was great. You didn't want to look at it, but it was.
You could
Somebody's
look at the
catching up.
passengers in the rear seat. Not in the 150. There are no passengers.
Not in the
in rear
150.
seat in the
That's
150.
Well,
great.
you can actually put a little bench back there.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can bolt a little bitty bench seat for putting the 2 grandkids or whatever kids in the back, or dog.
And watch
Just
them with
'cause-
the mirror.
Yeah,
Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, you should.
That's good point.
Now
Does
we
anybody-
put GoPros back there to.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Does anybody make an autopilot for the 150?
Not that I can, not a certified autopilot that I can find yet. And there's a couple people working on it and talking about it and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't meet the TAA and I can't log that TAA time, that's fine, because when I get into a plane that has, similar boxes to this kind of thing, then it's just a matter of managing the autopilot. And so I can demonstrate, I'm not going from steam gauges at 80 knots to all this, everything's new. When I go fly with or for somebody to see if I can get a job with them.
Yeah,
But
that's a pretty cool plan.
That's going to be an amazing 150.
Yes, it is.
it's I got it, and the Aerobat frame, right, and everything. So it's a lot sturdier, and it had low hours on it and everything else. So I felt like it was a semi-decent investment, as much as an airplane can be. And I got fortunate because I bought it in 2018 or 19.
Oh, good timing.
Yeah. Got really lucky on that one. So I don't think I'll ever sell it because, but we'll see. Okay, so that pretty much hits the oil, and then it's nice to know that the owner's manual or the POH trumps the engine stuff, and it might have to do with probe placement or just the way it works inside the motor, that kind of thing. That all makes great sense. And then I think there was
your last question was about CHTs versus oil temperature.
Well, and so I think my CHT question is pretty well answered, because I would go with the CHTs that are in the engine manual, because there's nothing about it in the owner's manual.
Yeah, because there was no CHT gauge.
No
Yeah,
CHT
that's a
gauge
good
on a
point,
150.
Yeah. And kind of note, they never really get above 320 or 360 so far.
That sounds good.
Well, they had to overcool the engine because it's flight training.
Oh,
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, just like 172. You
Okay.
overcool it because it's going to be
Slow and
be
slow.
careful. We have to say shock cooling. So, you full throttle, you take off, climb out, go around on downwind, because you're practicing dead stick landings. You suddenly go to idle, because, we have to avoid shock cooling, right? And so the engine had to be able to handle all that. And so the cooling was massive. All those flight training airplanes were overcooled.
Which is why he's more worried about oil temperature at this point.
Yeah.
Because CHTs are easy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Interesting.
And then the other thing was the fuel gauges. So I'm not sure if we got some extra time, I'd love to ask another part of a question. I put in fuel gauges, and when there's all the way filled up, they read 12 and 12, which it has 22 usable gallons. So to me, that should be 11 and 11, because it doesn't do a 0.5 on the fuel meter. And when after I fly it for a little bit or whatever, sometimes it sits and, it drips out. But when I go to dip it, I can dip it at total of 15 gallons, 7 and 8. But the fuel gauge still reads 10 and 10, which is 20. So I feel like I should trust the dip more than I should trust the fuel
Always.
gauges.
Always.
Okay.
Always.
All
Yeah.
right.
And
By
Needs
the
to
way,
be recalibrated,
do
maybe.
you know what the accuracy requirement is by regulation for fuel gauges?
So-
I know what it is.
So I know for a long time it was they have to show you that there's fuel in there, and then before it gets to empty, it has to read empty.
Right.
It's
The
not
only
something
the
like
only
that.
the only place that fuel gauges are required to be accurate is when the tank is empty.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
It's pretty
Yeah.
wide. You could drive a bus through that hole.
Yeah.
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 And I saw something about to you guys' conversation about the FARs and stuff, but I saw something about 3 years ago when I was thinking about the upgrade about fuel gauges needed to be more accurate very soon in the future. And so we'll see if that happens and how long that happens. I think mine, at the very least meet that requirement. But so dipping over some gauges that are maybe arbitrarily set
I always
by
dip
the
my
shop.
tanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yep.
then I don't know what it takes to get them recalibrated.
It's in the installation, the STC installation. It's not difficult. You drain the tank, you put
Well,
in
what
the
kind of
unusable
gauges do you
fuel.
put in? Like a CIES system or what?
Well, no, it's got the
Uh,
Garmin. You're using the
mhm.
Garmin
So
EIS, right?
it's still
Correct.
a capacitance
Yeah.
system.
No,
Yes.
it'll be a float, a resistive.
Oh, it's
system.
a float? Oh, really?
Well, I mean,
I just-
the Garmin doesn't provide the sensors,
No,
right?
the sensors will be the original unless you did SICE.
Okay.
Sice sounds very familiar.
CIES.
That's what I'm
Or
talking about.
CICE.
Yeah.
CICE.
Yeah.
They're
I
still
don't think you're
floats.
supposed to pronounce
But
it.
it's-
I think you're supposed
You
to
just
spell
spell
it
it.
out.
Yeah.
But
It's still a float though.
regardless of what, it's a float. So you put in the unusable and you tell the EIS, the Garmin, that's 0. And then you
Mhm.
add a certain amount of fuel and you tell Garmin that's 4
It's one,
gallons
yeah.
and you just work it up until it's full.
Mhm.
So that should have been done when it was installed. If
Yeah.
it's not correct, you can try it again.
Okay. And
Easy to
with
do.
with the 150, so the challenge we ran into is that the fuel's either on or off. You can't go left tank, right tank.
Yep.
And so to do that, the fuel calibration or whatever, I guess they ran into some problems because it asked to fill up like the left tank and then to fill up the right tank.
Yeah.
And so that was
Well, you turn. Yes.
Do
But I've
they
got another-
cross-feed?
I've got another Garmin shop down at Lincoln that I might try to have them take a look at it from the
Yeah,
sounds
that
of
is interesting
things.
because as you're filling one tank, it's cross feeding to the
Cross-feeding
other.
over.
But
Yeah.
Mhm.
but can't you shut the fuel off and
But
doesn't that-
I think
It'll
the
still-
two tanks are tied together, and the off is
It's
just
where
the
the-
just
outlet
at
of
the
where the
firewall.
fuel's like.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they
I-
they both feed and cross feed down to a tank underneath.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've not done that on a 150, so it never occurred to me that yeah.
Haven't
Well, they
tried
may
it
have to
yet.
come up with.
Well,
you
you
can
just have to
cap
be
it
really
off.
fast.
Yeah. No, they tried to cap it off or whatever the second time, and I said, you know what, good enough.
Mhm.
I just
Oh,
want to
well-
go fly this. I hadn't had the plane for almost 9 months. I want to
Yeah.
go fly it.
Well,
just
there you
want it
go.
back.
So you just need to calibrate it, and you'll be good.
Yeah, maybe.
All right. All right, Mike. We're going to cut
Cool.
you off there.
Colleen, and Paul and Mike, I really appreciate the time. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Thanks for telling us about your wonderful 152.
Yeah, it's
or
very
150.
cool.
150. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. All right,
Okay.
guys.
All right. Thanks for dialing in too.
Yep. See you, Mike.
See ya.
Our next question is from Albert, whose airplane is missing the go from Get Up and Go. Give us that backstory, Albert.
Well, we've got a Cessna 172S running out of a flight school, and it was acquired a couple of years ago, and it was always a little bit difficult to start. Everyone would say that it would flood very easily, but eventually it would start. And the first start of the day, of course, was easier than the subsequent starts of the day. The first flight was always out with some difficulty, and then every other flight after that just got harder and harder to start the plane. It would, and as I mentioned, it would flood very easily. It seemed like it would flood very easily, and this went on for months, and it just got progressively worse and worse to the point where even when it was just taxiing around on the ground, it would sputter and eventually die. And there was one time when a student got stranded on a cross country mission, and because on the taxi back, plane died and he couldn't get it restarted. So at some point we had to start throwing some mechanics at it, and they started with some of
Sounds
the
like you
obvious things,
threw more than mechanics.
changing how
at it.
Those things are heavy.
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So definitely mechanics along with a lot of money.
And
Right.
parts, yeah.
It started with some of the obvious stuff. Spark plugs, adjusting the fuel. Then we started replacing parts. The fuel, servo, spark plugs,
Ooh.
magnetos. It eventually got to the point where our mechanics kind of ran out of ideas, and they said, "Well, time to replace the engine."
Oh gosh.
Amputate.
Dude,
Yeah.
Don't
Go to the
do
knife.
Wow.
Ouch. Well, you didn't do that yet, right?
No.
Oh,
Okay, good.
Wow.
Well,
That's-
Well,
and
we're
this
not
went on.
we're not going to let you do that.
Yeah. Don't
Yeah.
touch the engine.
Yeah. So since we did, we gave it a shot. We were looking for new ideas, so we threw it. We thought, we'll throw it over to AOPA, right? And
Okay,
see
so now,
what we have to say.
this is in a flight school environment.
This is
Mm.
flight school.
Okay. Would you please describe for me the starting procedure that you have your to teach your students what the starting procedure is for that engine?
It's pretty much. I'll answer it like this. It's pretty much out of the POH for the 172, 172S model, fuel injected. We have them prime it with the fuel pump, and then on the startup, give the throttle just a little bit of a crack, a little bit, maybe half an inch, and then as it cranks, once it catches, gently put the mixture forward. Pretty much that's pretty much it. Nothing too complicated.
And what are their instructions for priming?
For priming, that one is mixture in, throttle, whatever the throttle says in the POH, and then run the pump a few seconds until we see the fuel flow just start to move.
Okay, because it was funny. I tried to pull a Colleen last night.
Oh,
Oh, you did some research.
you did some research.
I tried to research on what the proper starting procedure for the 172S is.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how much stuff there is on the internet about that, and how they all contradict one another.
Oh.
I think the best one I found was there was a YouTube video that Embry-Riddle put out on their starting procedure, because they got probably the world's biggest fleet of 172Ss, and it was actually a pretty good video. But there, when I went through your list of symptoms, a couple of things jumped out at me, because you made the comment that if the engine doesn't catch in the first couple of blades, it will never start unless you give it a period of time before you attempt the restart.
Mm-hmm.
Am I recalling that correctly?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that tells me that the engine is flooded, because that's the only thing that giving it some time would resolve. It would be excess fuel. It can't be a servo problem. It can't, because Lycomings are started with the mixture at idle cutoff.
Mm-hmm.
They're started on only the prime fuel. This is different than the way you start a Continental, for example. So you're putting some prime in the cylinders. You're pulling the mixture to idle cutoff, and then you're cranking the engine. And once it starts, then you push the mixture control back in to keep it running. But you're saying it's not that it fires and then dies. It's that it doesn't fire.
Right.
So this is purely a priming problem. Has nothing to do with the servo. And from the symptoms, it just seems clear that this engine is being overprimed for some reason. Most of the stuff that I read about the 172S says, and the 172S, it's all G1000 stuff. So you're looking at glass display, right?
Oh.
Right. Well,
and
some of the submersible gauges.
No,
but it basically says that you should prime it for 3 seconds. And I sort of have a feeling that my guess is it's probably being primed for more than 3 seconds. But the symptoms you describe really are consistent only with over priming. It just, because that's the only thing that that would cause the engine not to start. And then if you wait a while, then you can start it. But if you don't wait a while, you won't get it started. That just sounds like it has to be over priming, doesn't it?
What about the part where the engine dies when at idle during taxi? That's after you've started it. It's been running.
That's a different subject. The fuel servo has an idle mixture adjustment on it. It's the only adjustment on that servo.
Okay.
But it's like a star wheel kind of thing. That you set the idle mixture. And if you're having problems with the thing not idling properly, once it gets started, then it's a question of adjusting the idle mixture, and you're supposed to check it for an RPM rise as you pull a mixture to idle cutoff, and you should get something like a 50 RPM rise, something on that order. And if you're not getting a rise, then it means that the idle mixture is too lean, and you have to rich it up, which you can do by turning this little star wheel on the servo.
The other thing that occurred to me, because it went to
but that wouldn't affect starting. The idle mixture doesn't affect it starting. It affects idle. But starting is done with the mixture at idle cutoff, so the servo is not delivering any fuel when you're cranking it.
There's a little caveat in that, this being a gravity-fed airplane, if the airplane is sitting and there's leakage at the flow divider, sometimes you can have fuel in the cylinders. So it's basically a pre-primed engine, and then when you add priming to it, even if the minimal amount of priming, it suddenly gets over primed. So if your flow divider is not doing a good cutoff, you can have something similar in the starting process. And if it's not getting a good cutoff, it may give trouble setting your idle mixture as well.
So they replaced the servo or overhauled that, but they didn't overhaul the flow divider. And so you're focusing on the flow divider. It's having a leak.
Because
that's interesting, and that could be a progressive disease. It would get worse over time if the spring was too weak, for example.
Right. Yeah.
Or it's just getting weaker.
Yeah.
Right.
So and you've got head pressure because the tanks are well above the engine, and we see this. You see it on 210. See it on a lot of different airplanes where you'll end up with fuel leaking out the induction vents because it's just dripping and. Well, the solution is we'll just turn the fuel off.
Interesting question is are you noticing any anomalies when you shut the engine down?
Does it run on?
Well, when
Like-
it's running and you pull a mixtured idle cutoff, does the engine stop cleanly and immediately, or is there a tendency to run on for a while?
Chug. Yeah.
No, I can't say anything's been reported on the shutdown. It seems like once it gets started, everyone's pretty happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I kind of like Paul's flow divider theory. That makes perfect sense. The servo wouldn't make sense, but the flow divider would make sense because it's what's responsible for shutting
Delivering.
off the fuel.
Yeah. Cutting the fuel off.
When you pull a mixture control, it reduces the fuel pressure not to zero, but down to something below the threshold at which the flow divider spring is supposed to shut the sleeve valve in the flow divider.
And that supports you said that it's been getting progressively worse, and that's an average over all students. I mean, if it was a student technique, it wouldn't be consistently getting worse, but the getting worse part sounded like something was degrading, and you've already checked the servo, so the spring is quite a possibility. It would be interesting to go out and try a shutdown and see if you're still getting fuel dribbling in and it chugs a little bit before it finally stops on a blade.
And have you tried when it doesn't start? Do they understand how to do a flooded start?
Yes.
Or do they just
Apparently, they do that all the time.
Yeah.
So,
After a while, that became the norm.
I mean,
Yeah.
so the mixture is all the way back and the throttle is all the way forward, correct?
Right. Right.
And does it start when they do that?
That was the remedy for a while, and then even flooded starts weren't starting it off.
you might schedule a new starter replacement, but they're really exercising that starter.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Well, hopefully they know that they're not supposed to crank it for more than 30 seconds without letting the starter motor cool down, right?
Yeah. And then there's a 25% duty cycle.
But I like your flow divider idea, Paul. I think that really sounds like it might be the.
I mean,
You don't happen to have another 172S that you could steal a flow divider?
Yeah, they do.
To try.
Their school. Yeah.
We'd have to try. We'd have to look at that.
That's a real quick thing to do. Swap the two flow dividers and see if the problem moves for a different airplane. I love that. That's what we do on twins, but we don't have to use another airplane. We
swap parts.
I mean, we focused right on the fuel, and I think that was partially because you said that it starts fine or easier the first flight, but then when it gets warm, it's just too easy to overprime or have too much fuel when it's warm. I initially was focusing on ignition. I saw you said 2,000 hours and hard to start or getting progressively worse. Sounded like an impulse coupling thing to me, but you said you replaced the mags or overhauled the mags. So the next question I had was,
replacing the mags doesn't necessarily mean that they replace the impulse coupling.
Okay,
Yeah.
I assume they
but
did,
probably
because they're reporting a starting problem.
Yeah,
but okay,
probably.
but
And
people,
do you know if those engines start only on one mag, or if they?
They're
yeah,
both.
it's one mag. It's the left mag, right?
I thought they had 2 impulse couplings.
Okay, sorry.
Well,
They
I'm
They
always
address
confused about
both
that.
mags,
I know Pipers usually only have one.
yeah.
But
No, they have 2.
most Cessnas, but I don't know about the 172S, the newfangled one.
So where I was going with that was people often think ignition, they try the plugs because that's the cheapest thing. They look at the mags and they often overlook the wires. And at 2,000 hours, the wires could be not doing well. And the question is, do you get any missing in the air
You're
when
talking
you're
about
at
the
cruise?
ignition harness.
Ignition harness, yeah.
It sounds like everything was replaced,
Except for that.
but the ignition harness and the flow divider.
Yeah, I would check the flow divider first. I think listening to everything, but there is more to the ignition than just the plugs and the mags. So
I know this is going to sound terrible, but I would check the P leads as well. An airplane with a high time, those terminal ends may have been replaced over time. You could very well. And now this is a stretch, So I'm just thinking of things that I've seen that prevent airplanes from starting. But when you attach the P lead to the magneto, that terminal end needs to be bent up just a little bit, or it can possibly contact the outer part of that feed-through capacitor and actually short it out
But then the
And-
engine wouldn't
Well, it's an
run once you
intermittent.
start it.
He's saying
Well,
it.
but now it's not starting at all. Is what I'm saying.
Hmm.
I don't know. Just something to.
That's
easy
their
thing to look
job,
at.
is to keep it
Yeah.
from starting. So that's
Yeah.
possible. But
Yeah.
I don't know. He's got lots of things to think about, I guess.
But yeah, I like the flow divider. If it's an ignition problem, it certainly could be the harness. But 2,000 hours, the harness probably getting a little long in the tooth.
That's been
But
my experience.
Don't tear down the engine for something like
Yeah,
And-
for
that.
goodness sakes.
And the servo overhaul was probably not a good idea,
Yeah.
sadly.
I mean, it doesn't make sense given the way those engines start. If
Hmm.
it was starting but not idling properly, then you maybe could think the servo, although it's probably an adjustment on the servo, not a bad servo. But if the engine isn't catching at all, then that can't be a servo problem.
Yeah.
But it could be a flow divider problem.
Yeah.
If fuel is dribbling into the cylinders continuously, even with the mixture pulled at idle cutoff, then that could certainly account for what's being seen.
Yeah.
We had a
Makes
thought
sense.
to we also had a thought to check some of the fuel lines.
You're not seeing fuel dripping out the low point drain on the induction system when
No,
people are starting, are
Yeah.
you?
No.
Has anybody watched for that, I wonder?
Not that I'm aware of.
Because most people run the other way when somebody opens the window and says clear. They don't
Yeah,
stand around
you
looking.
don't hang around to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have suspected the fuel lines. That's probably
Yeah.
a lot of extra work.
I
But now
don't.
you got new fuel lines.
Yeah, we ended up replacing the fuel lines just to make sure that, on the suggestion that there was some contamination in there, and
Well,
they
that
were
would
old.
show up in the screen.
There's a screen
the-
in the servo that
in
you
the
could have
servo.
checked. Yeah.
Yeah. And that should be checked at every 100 hour, every annual.
Yep.
Okay.
So if you were having debris coming from the fuel lines or the tank, that should have been discovered in routine inspections.
Okay.
If they're not checking that, they need to be checking that.
Okay.
Swap flow
Remind
dividers.
Just saying.
Yeah.
So try swapping flow dividers. I like
Okay.
that.
So Albert, this
Easy
falls in the
thing to do.
category of you have to let us know what you find.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
We expect a return email.
We
Yeah.
like easy and cheap fixes, and this one
Yes.
sounds like it could be.
Okay. Sounds like we need to.
Get
Well, I don't
back.
Replace
know.
a few more parts.
Maybe Lycoming's very proud of that flow divider. I'm not sure how cheap that is, but
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
give it a look.
That can be overhauled if you have to.
Mhm.
No problem.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. We'll throw some more parts of the problem, I guess. And then,
Sorry.
Swap. You were swapping
No,
parts. That's
no,
different.
we're talking about stealing parts. We're
Stealing
not talking
parts.
about buying them.
Just to
this-
figure out if that'll do it.
This is what we call a 5-finger discount.
Just when I thought I heard it all from. Oh gosh. Okay. Well, do
Okay,
let
well-
us know, Albert. We want to
Yeah.
hear back. So
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay,
we're
thanks.
looking at this.
thanks for calling.
Thanks,
in.
Albert.
All right, it's time for letters. This one's talking about the recent show where the engine, I guess, didn't reach desired RPM. I've had a few of those. For this guy, he said he purchased his 1978 R182 in 1989, and it's got the 0540, and he had an RPM malfunction. In the winter months, he couldn't obtain takeoff RPM. After much head scratching and adjusting the prop linkage and the governor travel, I found the real problem to be rust of the prop cable. It had lived outside in Bakersfield, actually, for the first 9 years.
Oh.
The outer
There's
housing
rust in
threat,
Bakersfield.
yeah, due to the corrosion, effectively shortening the travel of the inner solid wire. That
Mhm.
time I worked at a local company, and he soaked the cable housing in some strong rust-eating chemicals, and the problem was fixed
Mhm.
until the next winter.
Mhm.
Then
Yeah.
it changed.
Of course,
Yep.
he had to. Did he have to remove it from the airplane? That's always fun.
Yeah.
I have actually wrapped a rag around it and just kind of soaked the heck out of it in situ, or dripped oil down the cable
Yep.
linkage inside the spiral. It's sometimes helpful, but it doesn't cure the
You
problem.
want a fun job? I changed both prop cables in
That's
my
not fun.
310.
No.
Not on a 310. Wow.
That's
But
Well-
when they work nice, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
So-
no, they were getting to the point where I felt that they were an airworthiness issue.
yeah. Yeah.
We've seen them a lot at the shop where the owner will complain in the winter, the prop cable or throttle or mixer are really difficult to move.
Too much grease.
And then, well, no, they get
Cold.
rusty and
Oh.
they get cold and
Mhm.
it clamps. But then after the engine runs for a while, the engine compartment warms up,
Huh.
and then
Oh wow.
it moves freer. But I've never seen one that wouldn't go all the way forward. It just
Yeah.
doesn't go in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very cool.
This one's interesting. It's from Art. He said, you recently suggested to a caller that he use a tire dressing or something like Armor All to help reduce weather checking of the tires. Remember, this is the guy who was going to be outside in Southern California in the desert.
Mhm.
Right.
He said, while I've never asked tire makers specifically about aircraft tires, I have frequently discussed motorcycle and car tires with them. And for those applications, they specifically advise not to use any tire dressing, saying that actually can increase weather checking. And of course, it
Wow.
will make the tread tire slippery if you overspray some of it onto the tread. And that's actually, we got 2 or 3 emails about this.
Oh, really?
Interesting.
Yeah.
My thought was just to put a cover over them like the RV owners do, not RV airplanes, but RV, like,
Yeah.
bus
Recreational
things,
vehicles. Yeah.
just to block the sun.
I've never heard that. I've always dressed my tires when I have motivation and time.
You like
Is
with Armor All or something?
Yeah, just polish them up a little
Yeah,
bit,
I
clean them
always
up.
heard that Armor All was not good for.
No, I use car tire dressing, tire shine or whatever. I mean, when you go to a dealership, they wash your car and it comes back with these beautiful shiny black tires. If the dealership's doing it, the way they trying to sell tires, you think? Or
Well, no, I think on cars though, how long do your car tires last? 2 years?
Hmm.
On an airplane,
Hmm.
those tires may be on there for 5 or 6 years. You don't
Yeah.
ever see a car tire weather cracked. I mean, I don't.
No, you don't.
Anymore.
The tread
Yeah.
goes before anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the tread goes before it, which is how
Huh.
I explain to people how I decide whether I buy an expensive tire or a cheap tire for my airplane. If it's going to weather crack and dry rot before you use up the tread,
Yeah.
buy a cheap tire with
Mhm.
thin tread. If you're going to wear the tread out before it weather cracks, then buy the expensive tire with the thicker tread. And there you go.
That's interesting.
Wow. I mean, they taught us in aviation A&P school to, soap and water on tire. That's it. Just kind of keep it clean, keep the gas and oil off of it. I guess maybe, tire dressing is kind of an oil or something like that. And that's the issue. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't
Very
know.
interesting.
I have all my tire work done in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Yeah, we know.
It's unplanned tech work.
Are you planning another stop this summer, Mike? Oh, boy.
I wouldn't stop anywhere else.
Yeah, that's true. Good point.
And then Justin is going to disagree with you here. He says,
Oh,
I was listening
this will
to
be
your-
a first. No one's ever disagreed with
No,
me.
never. He said, I was listening to your episode about oil spraying on the windscreen and you attributing it to the crankshaft seal rather than the case bolts. I have a Lycoming 0320 and I have a similar issue. I put some oil dye in the oil and ran it and then tried to identify the leak using a UV light. I definitely had oil seeping out of the case bolts and couldn't find any oil leaking in the crankshaft seal area.
Wow.
After consulting with my A&P, we decided to remove case bolts one at a time and put Permatex Ultra Gray in the holes and replace and retorque the bolts and let them sit overnight. That seemed to improve the oil spray in my case, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't the crankcase seal. I'm assuming similar to the caller, the silk thread is not sealing property. Have you heard of this before?
Well, certainly crankcase leaks are common, especially on Lycomings. But
Well,
in
the
order-
Lycoming through bolts don't use O-rings like Continental, right? They just
these
rely
are
on a close tolerance fit.
he didn't say he pulled the through bolts out, did he? He's
Well,
talking
what
about
bolts could he be talking about?
the crankcase, not the through bolts that hold the cylinders on, but the bolts in the
parting
top,
surface.
the
Yeah.
parting surface of the
Yeah.
case halves.
Oh, just the spine bolts?
Yeah, the spine bolts. I mean,
That's
they
what he
leak.
suggested.
That's real common. The problem is you have to get the oil from there
Yeah.
up to
Out
the
the cowl.
windshield, out
To
of the
windshield.
cowling.
So you need forward airflow.
You've got to
Yeah.
have which
Which
that's
happens, yeah.
possible. That happens. The air comes in, the air inlets, meets at the back, and then comes forward and spills
Circulates
out
around.
in the
Along
center.
the top of the parting surface. Yep.
But it also has to separate from the engine. So
Hmm.
you've got oil that's seeping out onto a surface,
Hmm.
and there's really in
Hmm.
order for it to separate, you have to have a lot of air, and you have to have like a bead of oil to come off. Just a film isn't going to separate. You can take an air blower and blow that on that film of oil in the crankcase, and you're probably not going to get any of the oil to depart. So it'd have to be a pretty good oil leak. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying it's going to be difficult to get that oil to lift off the crankcase surface, move forward, and spill out at the spinner and get to the windshield.
Hmm.
Coming out of the crankshaft seal, it's already on a rotating surface, which is the crank shaft, and it's being slung.
It's
It-
a high velocity air right there.
It's high
Mm.
velocity,
Relatively.
it's being misted, all
And it's
that.
being pressured out, right? It's being blown
Right.
out. So
So I think it can happen on the crankcase. I think it's difficult. Oil filler caps on Continentals, where they have the filler, or even on the 6-cylinder Lycomings with the oil filler on top of the engine, right there with the door. I
mhm.
can see that happening when the filler caps lose
Yeah.
seal. Then
Yeah.
you have oil spraying up from there and then coming out through the oil filler door. I would see that.
Hmm.
So
Paul,
definitely,
have you ever used that UV dye?
I never have.
That sounds like a good idea to me. It's
I've got
I
an
think
oil
it's
leak I'm
I think it's an
chasing. I would
automotive
like that right now.
product, but apparently you put a little of this stuff in the oil and then you use a
Do you go
ultraviolet
flying
light.
or do you just do a run up on the ground? Because flying
Well,
takes too long. It'll
it'd probably be better to do a run up on the ground because
Yeah.
flying is going to distribute the oil
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, it
Yeah.
depends on the
Harder.
leak. Some leaks don't show up until you're airborne and
Oh.
all that. You know, it takes a while for them to flow. Another thing, this is we tried this for a while and it's moderately effective. You can get a black light and the yellow glasses and just use the black light around the engine and the organic oil will illuminate.
really.
Yeah, you go onto Amazon and look up oil detector kits, and for like $25, they use it on cars all the time.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
but
But it doesn't
again,
involve putting anything in the oil. It's just
no, nothing in the oil. But of
you
course,
have to use 15W50 though.
well,
No,
all
zero
of them have
weight.
a little bit of dinosaur meat in there.
Interesting. Yeah.
So.
I've never
And
heard of that.
We've got some of those, and we use them from time to time. It's sometimes very effective, and other times not so much. But that's a real cheap, easy way to look. But you have to get the engine perfectly clean
Yeah. Yeah.
and dry first,
Mhm.
and like the whole engine. You know, some
Yeah.
people try to do a little touch up here and there because I know the leak is right there. It's
Mm-mm.
never right there. It's always someplace different, and yeah, a really good cleaning and good drying. Mineral spirits, don't wash it with mineral spirits because it just leaves that film. So you're going to
Avgas.
need, yeah. Well,
I use Avgas. It's a great solvent.
just be really careful when you're spraying it because you create that.
I don't spray it. I just wet the rag and
Oh, well, yeah,
Wipe,
but
wipe,
you
wipe.
can't, you can't clean an engine there's nooks and crannies. You just can't
yeah,
get
there
to.
are
Have
nooks.
to
Oh, I
spray.
see. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I do use mineral spirits when I use the power sprayer or the
Yeah.
air compressor sprayer. And you're right. It does leave a film.
Don't do
Brake
like
cleaner.
Carburetor cleaner. I
Yeah.
don't know what the difference is in the two, but brake cleaner, you think about steel parts. Carburetor cleaner is almost always going to be designed for aluminum. I'm assuming. I have absolutely no scientific basis for that
Are you a
statement.
chemist? You
I
putting
am
your
not a
chemist hat
chemist,
on?
so but if I'm going to spray and try to clean and dry an area on an engine, we
Mhm.
keep carb cleaner around.
Yeah,
for
I
that.
love carb cleaner.
Yeah,
Have it around.
it does
Yeah.
a great job.
Okay. Good.
Don't spray it in your
But
face.
it's rough on paint.
It is rough on paint.
Yeah.
It's right up there with oven cleaner. Our next question is from Slavic, which is not actually his name, but we're going to be not pronouncing it incorrectly any worse than we can. Anyway, who's wondering when to break out the safety wire. Go ahead, Slavic.
That's right. Hello, everybody. And
Hello.
I'm a second time caller now.
Oh, okay.
Um, so thank you again for your show. I really love it. And this is sort of my story. I own two fixed wing airplanes, but recently I've completed my helicopter, like a kit helicopter.
Oh, congratulations.
Very cool.
And I started taking helicopter flying lessons,
Mhm.
like in a school. So when I was doing preventative maintenance on my airplanes, I was always taught to safety wire oil filter. It's like it's a big thing, and it's
Mhm.
it's difficult and awkward to do that usually, but I was told that's the rule. So lo and behold, I started taking helicopter lessons, and part of the pre-flight checklist on the Robinson ARC-22 is the security of the oil filter, but there is no safety wire, and it's just screwed on. It's a Lycoming engine, just like an engine
Wow.
on an airplane, and my understanding that helicopters actually vibrate, and much the rate of vibration is much more severe, but it's not a concern for helicopters. Looks like that the oil filters would spin off and fall off. So my question is, do you need the safety wire oil filters?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Were all the helicopters like that, or just
we-
that one?
Are we unanimous?
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, right.
So-
In that school, at least, the FBO maintains the helicopters there,
Mhm.
and there are two of them. Actually, there are more than two. I saw two Robinson 22 and one Robinson 44. None of them have safety wires.
Wow.
Whoa.
I would never have guessed that. I mean,
Well,
the only thing I could think is
why
that
don't
maybe
you go talk to the director of maintenance and say that that you're really curious about this, and you were thinking about asking the FISTO about it, but he thought you'd ask him first.
Oh my
Yeah, you
goodness,
do
I hope
that.
nobody's gonna be in trouble.
Wow. I mean, I wonder if the vibration frequency or something is different on a helicopter, and that's the reasoning why but it still vibrates the heck out.
I
Well,
can't-
and it's also
I-
about
I
temperature
find-
changes.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, because a car, you just tighten the living daylights out of an oil filter. The engine always goes to the same temperature, and it stays the same temperature all the
Hmm.
time. But an airplane engine goes to significant extreme temperature changes. Wow, I cannot imagine not safety wiring an oil filter, but I can't also ever recall any accident from an oil filter that came off.
Yeah, that's true. But we do the drain plugs. We do
Yeah.
the plug on the oil cooler. Everything with the oil system is safety.
No,
That's
I've seen a lot of accidents with oil hoses that weren't properly
Right.
tightened.
or
And
dipsticks that were left off.
Yeah, and oil filter adapters, those kind of
Yeah.
things. But
Yeah.
the oil filter itself,
Huh.
because we safety them.
But this is a Lycoming. Can you picture a Lycoming that doesn't
No.
have provision for safety wiring the oil
No.
filter? That doesn't
No.
make sense.
Well, there's a little loop that's built into the accessory housing for the
Mhm.
safety wire.
Hmm.
And because mechanics have this
Ham-fisted.
affinity for safety wire pliers, which I think should be taken away and thrown in the trash, because
Old timer.
when you spin the safety wire, you pull, and you have to pull really hard, and
Mhm.
it doesn't take long, and that little ear gets pulled
It's
out.
gone. Yep.
And once it's gone, now you have to safety wire. You loop around the oil temperature probe
Mhm.
or some other appendage on the back of the engine. And if people would just, you know,
Paul's obviously got something, a vendetta going here.
I got a little. Get
You're
up on my
digressing,
soapbox.
Paul.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We're
Nevertheless,
sorry. This
yes,
irritates you.
safety wire.
So
Safety-
Paul is in favor of safety wire and
Yep.
opposed to safety wire pliers.
Yes.
Yes. So you got a half answer from Paul.
Half answer. Sorry.
But
Well,
I'm all for it.
Aren't the safety wire pliers okay if you don't spin them? I mean, the thing that
Oh, it's the
causes them
pole.
to lock and clamp on the safety wire, that's a good thing, right?
Well, except that the
it's
jaws,
it's the spinning thing that
Yeah, so you could manually spin them is what Mike's saying. You can clamp them and then just turn them.
nobody ever does that.
I do that. I do that all the
Oh,
time, but I
gosh.
also pull as hard as I can to make sure
Exactly.
it's nice and tight.
You're
Yeah.
going to pull as tight as you
well,
can.
and
And that little tab is missing on my Cardinal.
and
So
Yeah.
yeah.
my safety wire pliers anyway are unidirectional. So if I have to turn safety wire in the reverse direction, I have to do it by hand.
That's right. I do
Yeah.
that too. Sometimes
Well,
I do.
So for me, of course, I'm the weird guy. I safety wire by hand, and you don't have to pull really hard to make that happen. But also, when you clamp the safety wire pliers onto that wire, the
Yeah, that's it.
serrations on the
Yep.
jaws damage the safety wire.
Yeah, it does. I've always
Yeah, but
wondered
that's the
about
part
that.
you're going to clip off anyway.
Well, not always. Not on.
always. Yeah,
No,
so I
you're.
do it close in first and then I
Yeah.
pull it
Well,
back.
if
Yeah.
we're talking about safety wiring, a Hartzell propeller or something.
Well, or anything, because
All
you
different.
got to do the first spin, and then you loop it through
Yeah.
whatever part you're safetying, and then you do the second spin.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah.
these things never break. I get it. I'm just
Yeah,
being
but-
that guy. But I safety wire
So
by
when you say
hand.
you safety wire by hand, you mean you don't use any tools, just
That's
your
what
hands?
he's saying.
I'll use safety wire pliers to cut it at the end,
To cut it. He doesn't use
And-
his teeth.
and
What about
and to
what about
curl it. You
to
have to
pull
curl
it
it.
through the hole? You do that by
Well,
hand?
I'll get it through the hole initially, and then I'll pull the pliers. But that's way off on the part that's definitely
Ask
going to be
Paul
thrown
to show
away.
us all the scars on his hands and
Hey,
his wrists
if
from safety
you don't
wire.
leave DNA on the airplane, you did not safety wire.
Ah.
Okay. Well,
They-
you need to do YouTube video on your safety.
They
wire.
wouldn't let us use safety wire pliers in A&P school, but
Good.
they also wouldn't let us use vice grips. As soon as I got out of there, I bought myself a whole set of vice grips from Harbor Freight
And safety wire pliers.
Oh,
I
they
love
probably
my
would. They
safety
probably
wire
didn't let you use JB Weld either, huh?
No, they didn't let us do
Oh.
that either.
No.
So, but
Slavic.
back
I'm
to-
sorry.
back to
we've
Slavic's question.
Totally gone off rails here.
Yeah,
Now-
we all
yeah.
think your oil filters on the helicopter really need to be safety wired, and you have. To
I
have
would have
a
been
chat-
shocked,
a chat
too,
with the director of
personally.
maintenance about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, definitely. Go have a discussion.
Scary.
That sounds good. I'll
Yeah.
try
You
to
know,
do that.
I was always taught that helicopters are constantly trying to reject all their parts and the earth. That's why
And
they're so
that's why-
ugly and they move around a lot.
And,
So,
and that's how they fly. Is they
Yeah, that's how they fly.
repel
Earth
the
repels
earth
them.
repels them, or
yeah,
Yeah.
all their
Yes.
parts are held together with a prayer.
yes. Well, we're happy that your oil filter didn't come off, despite
Yes.
the fact that it wasn't safety
Well,
wire.
It is apparently well tested, right?
I would be nervous about that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I occasionally leave safety wire off certain things.
Hmm.
Like the plug that covers up the adjustment on my turbo controller is supposed to be safety wired. And I
Right.
usually don't, because I'm always futzing with it while I'm in the field. But oil filter is a big, massive thing.
I've
you know.
been adding safety wire, if anything. I've been safety wiring the bolts on my calipers, which I didn't used to do,
Yeah.
but heck,
Mhm.
they're easy to get to. And I've been safety wiring the screws and bolts that hold my wheel pants on my Skybolt, because I'm just tired of checking them on pre-flight and finding them loose. So I put drilled bolts in.
But it does seem to me that if it's something that if it unscrews in flight, it will
Mhm.
cause the engine to fail. That's a pretty good argument for safety wiring.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
agree. All right.
Makes sense.
Did,
All right,
did
thank
we
you
help
very
at all, Slavic?
Go get them.
Yeah, so to tell you the truth, there is a aspect in my experimental helicopter. The engine is from the automotive world.
Oh,
It's actually a derivative of the Volkswagen.
Mhm.
What kind of
engine.
helicopter is this?
It's
Is
a
this a
ro-
rotorway?
Rotorway, yes.
Oh,
exactly.
yeah.
Okay.
So, and as you can imagine, the oil filter for that engine comes from the automotive world, and it
Mhm.
just doesn't have any
Oh.
provisioning for
Yeah.
safety
No
wiring.
provisions for safety wire.
Good point.
There is
Yeah.
no little tabs with little holes like on
Can't-
our regular Tempest filters.
Well, don't drill a hole in the oil filter and use that as a safety wire hole. That won't work.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Well, the filter won't come off, but other problems will occur.
That's a good point. I'll bet it's
Yeah.
cheaper than an aviation filter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Is this rotorway flying, or is it still in the
Yeah,
process of being?
Yeah, it is flying, and it is just
wow.
like all it little friends, thousands of rotorways that are built. Doesn't have safety wire at the oil filter.
Well, if
Yeah.
there are provisions for safety wiring, they should be
Do it.
safety wired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You have a
Good.
good excuse for no wire.
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds like a really, really neat aircraft.
Mike's cranks, the
Yeah,
little cranks are
it's
turning
going.
in his head. Ooh, a helicopter. You have a helicopter rating, Mike?
No, I do not.
Oh, there you go. It's never
Float
too
plane,
late. Yeah,
float
well-
plane, sailplane. No helicopter.
Yeah, it's time to go get another rating. Go have some fun.
All right, Slavic.
Well, all right. Yeah. Thank you
Yep.
so much for.
Thanks for the
answering.
question.
Thanks for
Very
calling back.
interesting.
Good to see you again.
Good
Yeah.
to see you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's a wrap on another Ask the A&Ps podcast. Let us know how we did. You can send us your questions by email to podcasts@aopa.org. We look forward to hearing from you.
See you next time.
Bye.